Hey y'all, what is up and what I do? It is your boy Jared Hamline from the Trailer Punk Podcast, friend of the show, brother to the podcaster himself. I was talking to Justin recently, and he was talking to me about maybe doing some movie reviews for 2025 for the podcast. And yes, please, I'd be happy to do that. So I think I'll be doing that about once a week. I asked him where to start. He said the best start, I think, would be for your favorite movie of 2024. I'm like, solid. Which that movie, if I have to pick one from this year, I will absolutely choose I Saw the TV Glow. That's a movie so good, even Scorsese sing its praises. It's complete with the 90s aura with the pink opaque that's like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark mixed with Buffy and Alex Mack. I don't know about you, but I love when a movie gets personal. And I saw so much of myself in this bittersweet movie that by the end I was literally full on ugly crying. The hazy and fuzzy warm aesthetics and music lures you in. It makes you cozy all while the underlying layer of unease also churned your stomach with longing and claustrophobia. It's a movie that shows that nostalgia isn't just a feeling, it's a perception. It's a way of processing how we see and feel the world around us. Home life and relationships and nostalgia all form this chrysalis. And the wonderful thing about butterflies and moths is no one times how long it takes for them to emerge into their true self. We're all just happy to see their beauty and to celebrate them when they do. And if it takes a little longer, that's okay. There is still time. 5 stars.
There we go.
Hey,
Cool.
dude, that is the
Awesome.
coolest shirt.
Oh,
I,
thanks.
I love that movie. It's so good.
It's like absolutely insane. And when people haven't seen that movie, I'm like, oh, we're watching it right
Oh yeah,
now
yeah.
because
It's one of those you got to put on. You're like, okay, you want to see madness from the
yeah,
beginning to the very end. You had like all the best Italian directors and writers and everybody on board that one. And it
right,
was pure, like everybody just any bit of chaoticness was just like, okay, here we go. And then
right. Yeah, they went for it. And yeah, funny enough, recently the woman that played the black
yeah.
prostitute,
Mhm.
she followed me on Instagram, and I was like, holy shit, like,
Oh,
it's like such a funny moment of like, I mean, I've been watching that movie since I was probably like 18
yep.
or even younger, even. And like, it's
Wow.
been one of my favorites. And like, there's such a weird world where like that woman knows who I am.
Yeah.
It's just like, what the fuck is this? So,
Well, you've made your way around like on social media. Like you've become a bit of a presence. Like I knew Goth Dad before I mean, it was obviously like Goth Dad, then it transitions into a Vision Video.
right.
And you, I mean, shoot, man, you were kind of, talked about in Fangoria and all these different things. So you have kind of become a bit of a staple in these sort of the horror family. Like, do you feel
Yeah.
like you've become part of that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been a horror obsessed person for, I mean, probably 30 years now. I mean, yeah, because I was really young when I started getting into horror movies. So I mean, I think there's always been like an aspect of what I do, both musically and just sort of in my life, that is very much so in the world of like horror. Um, so yeah, I mean, I sometimes I feel like I haven't really put a lot into the realm of like creation with horror,
Yeah.
but I mean the music kind of espouses a lot of that. And I mean, I don't know, like a lot of our like music videos and stuff are they're almost all like horror centric, or there's like, but that's like sort of goth stuff in general. I think horror and goth are very intersectional.
It goes with it.
um
And,
it's
yeah.
very rare that you meet somebody that's like into goth that isn't into horror. I've met a couple people who are like that, and they're kind of more into the dark aesthetic or
Right.
this or just the music, but are like, yeah, I don't watch horror movies because I can't handle it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, typically it's a pretty like intersectional thing.
What horror movies were you like starting out watching, like growing up? Like, what was your first like holy shit moment in horror that really just catapulted you into fandom?
So I think the first like proper horror movie that I saw was one that I wasn't supposed to see, which was Pet
Yeah, I
Cemetery.
think they're all like that, right?
Yeah,
Who's
yeah. So
watching this?
I was 8. So this was 20 sorry, 30 years ago. Jesus.
Yeah,
I was 8 years old, and my dad and my sister were watching Pet Cemetery. They had rented it on VHS, and they were watching it in the living room. And I was told like, "Oh, you can't watch this one." So I like snuck into but like basically from the hallway behind the couch, and I watched pretty much all of it, and it scared the absolute shit out of me. I mean, I was so terrified by it, but like I also loved it, and I think that was the first one. But like as I got kind of more into the idea of like what horror films were and sort of the genre at large, I mean, like Night of the Living Dead,
absolutely.
the Living Dead series, like all the Romero movies really got me. And I just became really fascinated. Like I was super into zombie films when I was a kid, and I still am. Because yeah, just like I remember being a kid and like watching. Funny enough, I saw the remake of Night of the Living Dead, which I think is a better movie anyway. But I
Yeah,
I will die on that hill, and
it's okay.
people get really upset about that opinion, but whatever.
It's
But I
okay.
saw that movie, and I remember, and that was kind of like, it was like before things like 9/11, and before I feel like the shift in the world happened. And I remember just being like fascinated with the concept of like survival and being like, what would you have to do to make it through the zombie apocalypse or whatever? Or, so those things really captured me. But my taste in horror has evolved a lot. Like, I think now I find myself really fascinated with like really heady paranormal stuff. Like I watched have you seen Oddity?
Yes, yeah, it's on
Yeah.
Shutter.
Yeah, that one blew me away. Like stuff
Yeah.
like that I think is just super cool. Stuff that plays with like old sort of like ancient paranormal stuff. I just think it's really fascinating because I think it's just a really good like storytelling mechanism. But yeah, I mean, I think no matter where I've been in my life or what I've been doing, horror and horror movies and fiction and reading horror novels, like, I mean, it's so like stereotypical, but like Stephen King to me is like such a phenomenal author, and I've
Amazing.
read so many of his books.
Mm.
And I find myself like every time I read a new one, I'm like, wow, this is really good too. Like every
Yeah,
single time. I don't think I've read a bad Stephen King book.
I
So
haven't. No, I haven't.
yeah. So yeah, it's a huge aspect of everything in my life.
I agree. And I think even like I think when it comes to horror, I think your taste should get progressively
Mm,
more aware, I guess mature and better.
yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, unless somebody really dives deep into like this sort of horror iceberg where it's almost like it's worse, where you're looking into, cartel type stuff. I think a lot of when it comes to horror, and as you get older, I think you become a little bit more aware of your own mortality and kind of a deeper, darker understanding of things. Like I think I watched a short, and I can't think of the name of it. I like watching a lot of them on YouTube, like YouTube
Mm,
horror movie shorts.
yeah.
And one of them was, I think it was called The Chair, and this dude's progressively losing his mind. Like he can't
Ah,
trust his own awareness. Like anytime he thinks something's happening, it's not happening. Like it shifts into the complete opposite of what he's thinking. And I think
right.
that's my fear, where it's like I can't even trust my own brain anymore, where I can't even
Right.
Like I'm not myself. Like I'm completely
Yeah.
different person, and it's
No,
scary.
that's a super founded, that's a well-founded a fear. I mean, and that's something that actually that I realized when I was a paramedic and firefighter,
Mm-hmm.
going to a lot of like nursing homes and assisted living facilities,
Oh.
and you see a lot of people that are like sort of losing their cognitive function, and it's really upsetting because like you'll go into a lot of these like there's a lot of assisted living facilities where it's like you have your own sort of apartment, and their whole life is in there, and it's like pictures of their kids or their grandkids, and or like like, so a lot of the older guys have like their military photos and all this stuff that's their life, it's the story of their life, but then you see this person that is clearly sort of degenerating. And yeah, I mean, and I think that's just sort of a like the loss of agency and the loss of personage is a very real thing that pretty much all of us will face at some point in our life, whether it's ourselves or somebody that we love. On a long enough timeline, you will experience it, and it's yeah. I mean, I think it's a reasonable fear, but I also think that like stuff like that helps us like exercise the real fear of the world, and allows us to like tackle topics and thoughts and feelings that are tough and that are actually scary.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go on to your album, your latest album, Modern Horror. Was it produced by Ben Allen, the guy who did Animal Collective and all them? That
Yeah.
How did
So
that come
yeah,
about?
it was awesome working with Ben. I mean, you know, I I have this thing where I love watching people who are like the top of their game, like whatever it is. Like I love watching people do that thing when they're like masters, and he is one of those people, and it's like I learned a lot in that studio session from just observing him and how he likes to layer sound and create these really like lush, dense soundscapes within a song. And he does it in ways that I just like would never have conceived of. um and yeah, he's just a really wonderful guy. And I think there's a lot of looking at the record now, it's been out for like I guess 3 months now.
It's
And
October, yeah.
yeah, and I look at it now, having kind of been removed from it just a little bit and not like thinking about it all the time.
Right.
There's a lot of production that is very much so like his style, and it's stuff that I wouldn't have necessarily gone for, but I'm appreciative of it because I think it really made it so much better than anything that I would have conceived of, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool because like Ben is such a fan of music. I mean, he's a producer, but he's also a musician himself, and he's a fan of so many different kinds of music. And I think that when we first approached him about it, he was really interested because he loves like new wave and post punk, but he also likes a bit of sort of goth. And I mean, that's such a nebulous genre anyway. But yeah, he just really understood like what we were trying to achieve, and I think he did a really good job. And it was awesome. I mean, being and his studio is incredible too. It's like right on the belt line in Atlanta, so we got to like hang out there every day and just use all this world class equipment that's like crazy. And yeah, it was
Intimidating
awesome.
sometimes, intimidating when you
Yeah,
go
it can
see the
be.
magnitude and studio. You're like, oh, I'm not just this, when you're like more of like a bedroom producer and you're kind of doing
Right.
your own thing in your tiny studio, and then you bring it to you're just like, okay, this is where you come in, and I'm just gonna watch you and kind of follow your lead.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely intimidating. I think like when you're working with people like Ben Allen, you're really aware of the fact that you're working with somebody that has like won a Grammy, and you're like, all right, I have to be on my A game. So the strive to really nail the parts And like I'm a very like imprecise guitar player. I like, I always say I pretend to know how to play guitar. Like I'm not, people are like, oh, like play F7
Freebird,
sharp.
yeah.
I'm like, I don't fucking know
No.
what that is, man. I just literally put my hands on
Yes.
a guitar long enough to figure out a piece that sounds appealing to me and it sounds like something that I would want to hear and listen to, and then I go with it. But
Yep.
yeah, in that environment, you're definitely pressed to be better and to be like really well rehearsed. Like leading up to the studio, we just gone on tour, so I was already a little tighter than I normally would be, but I spent days just like playing everything over and over and over again, because you don't want to go in there and like show your ass, you want
Right.
it to be like, all right, like I'm worthy of this time.
Right.
Yeah, so it was really cool.
He really knows, like, what was great that I thought he brought to your album is he can take the elements of certain genres that are, I mean, I'm not saying it's of the past, but takes those
Right.
elements of goth, post-punk, which were big 80s and 70s,
Mhm.
well, late 70s, 80s, some 90s and stuff, but he can make it timeless. And I think
Yeah.
that's what he brought to your album was takes these amazing elements of goth, post-punk, new wave, dark wave, whatever you want to add to it, and he
Mhm.
made it timeless, which I think
Yeah.
is going to work in your favor with this album, where it's good. People are going to come to it and not go, "Oh, I'm going to compare it to Susie. Oh, I'm going to compare it to Bauhaus. Oh, I'm not going to
Yeah.
compare it to Sisters." But it's its own entity. It's its own beauty, and I think
Right.
that's what's amazing about modern horror is that it's really its own thing, and you guys really made vision video your own thing. And I think that's what's really great about you guys is you're able to just you're part of the group, but you stand out in your own elements. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely. I mean, I think like one of my goals with the band, especially with this record, but it's always kind of been an aspect of it, was
Mhm.
not to like just do the replicatable, like stereotypical, like straight goth sound or post punk sound, or like, there's a lot of amazing bands out there right now in current operation, but like, I feel like a lot of bands within the genre do kind of do a very replicatable sound. It's like the same
Yeah,
sort
no, I get
of sound over and
cookie
over again.
cutter.
And
Right.
there's nothing like wrong with that. I'm not going to be one of these people. It's like everything has to be different, because like there's really nothing new under the sun.
No.
We're all sort of replicating stuff. But I did want to bring, I think like that there's like the differences within the margins. So it's like the small things that just make it a little bit different. And I'm interested in those margins. I'm not, like I mean, obviously all goth and post punk's going to have like really driving bass lines and like sort of tom heavy drums and reverb on everything and blah, blah, blah. But like, I, I wanted to do something that felt just slightly off kilter, a little bit different, a little more modern, with but all the while still paying homage to the stuff that I love, that I find myself constantly listening to. Because I mean, the reality of any sort of subculture or music genre or whatever, any scene, is that if there isn't some level of innovation, it will die out, because people just get tired of seeing the same thing. Like, there are a lot of goth nights that I've been to, and I won't name names, but like where you go and like you hear the same 10 songs or 20 songs
Oh,
like
I get that, yeah.
over and over and over again. And I'm always really delighted when I go to a goth night, uh, and see somebody DJ and they're playing like new stuff and they're doing stuff that's a little like, oh, this is a band that just put this single out, and that tells me that they're more in tune with what's going on. But like, yeah, I mean, it's there has to be some like level of innovation and change, while still maintaining the identity of the thing, and that's a really tenuous balance, because like people get really pissed off. Like if you want to see some very angry, frustrated people about something really stupid, just go type in Vision Video on Reddit, and you'll see like hundreds of people arguing. They're like, oh, this isn't goth, this isn't this, this isn't this. And then there's other people like, yeah, it is. And it's just, it's so stupid. But whenever you do kind of push the envelope a little bit or try to do something a little different, you're always going to have that kind of kickback. And it's, I mean, I take that as a good sign, to be honest. So
I think so too. I mean, you're generating buzz. If you got people talking about your music, then you're obviously doing something right. You know
right.
what I mean? Because then it brings a community together where you got people who are like, oh no, this, and then you got your fans that are coming in going, well, you don't really know, and that kind of thing. And so I think that's a
Yeah.
good thing.
At the end of the day, it's not all that important as well. Like I when we first started the band, Dan, our original bass player, and I used to like very jokingly refer to Vision Video as goth pop.
Right.
And that made so many people angry. Like, and I'm just like, why do you like this is a joke?
Yeah.
But on top of that, like, why do you care? Like, this is so stupid. And we put it like on our like for a while we had it on like the Vision Video Instagram page. It was like goth pop band from I don't even know if it's still there, but like it's and we kept it there because it was like so many people got incensed over it and they didn't realize that they were like playing into this joke that we had. And it's just it's like what a silly thing to spend any amount of time arguing over. Like, I mean, it's just such a non-issue, and I think people are just looking for things to be outraged about. So
And I
whatever.
think like aesthetic perfection, I think he likes to bring industrial pop and
Mhm.
just really just starts, it's ruffling a lot of feathers where people are like, hey, now you're not supposed
Yeah,
to be, popularizing my favorite genre of music. And he's just
yeah,
like, look, I'm doing my thing. I just love
right.
doing it. And what's even great is you guys have a way, I mean, even with Goth Dad, you guys have a way of poking fun at modern things in the light of goth and industrial and stuff, and just going, can we just have fun with this?
Oh yeah, I
Have
mean
fun, enjoy our lives.
that's always been an aspect of
Yeah.
that too. Like I don't take the goth dad thing very
No, I know you
seriously
don't. No,
because like I never intended it for it to be a thing at all. Like the
it was great.
internet
It's funny.
rolled like just blew that up. Like,
Yeah.
and I kept going with it and I don't really do it that much anymore. Like, I mean, people just sort of referentially call me goth dad now. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But like, I don't get upset about it. And B,
Right.
like, I don't like that's not the main feature of what I do, and it never really has been. So, I mean, but I do love it though because even from a young age, like I got into goth as a subculture and as like as a scene about 20 years ago. So I was about 18
Sounds
years
about right.
old,
Yeah, sounds like
and like yeah, I mean, for me it was the thing that I always have loved it, and I've always felt at home going to goth nights or shows or whatever, and I've been doing so regularly for 20 years. But the only thing that really drove me nuts was like the self seriousness and like the sort of like, like I think people got really fixated in the 90s around this like vampiric sort of like, oh, I'm so demure and I'm so disaffected and like, I mean, like a fucking vampire, basically.
yeah, I remember
And
that.
I'm like, dude, you're a human being, and like we all look like universal horror movie monsters from the 30s. Like you cannot take this shit that seriously. Like you're not that cool. None of us are cool. We're
None of
actually
us
all
are
a bunch of fucking
human.
dorks.
Yeah.
Like we are super giant
Human.
dorks, and like and I don't know. I just like and not to be like too serious about it, but like I've been through a lot of like really actually dark things in my life and seen a
Yeah.
lot of really horrible fucking awful shit. And like it just like it's just so cheesy to me when I see somebody acting like, oh, I'm dark and mysterious. I'm like, no, you're fucking not, dude. You're really truly not. So I like the fact that like the goth dad thing really took the piss out of like the whole self-seriousness thing, and it just pissed off a lot of people. And I mean, like I'm not one of those people that's just like an edge lord that wants to just like push people's buttons for no
Not
reason,
trolling.
but that
Right.
was really funny to me and
Yeah.
continues to be very funny to me.
No, that was great. And then like so coming into goth and punk, was it like 90s? Was it Manson, Nine Inch Nails stuff, or were you did you discover the early stuff? But what
Yeah. So my sister is 6 years older than me, and she was super into goth in the 90s, like the sort of mid to late 90s. She was in high school, and I was just like, a kid. But
sounds
I
like it
always sort of,
was like that
yeah,
too. I got
yeah.
introduced. Yeah, so I get it.
Oh, killer. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it was for me, it was like I looked to her as like initially, I guess, like an aesthetic inspiration, because that was around the time that I was getting into horror. And so I'm like 8, 9, 10 or whatever, and she's like 16, 17, and she was so that must have been, yeah, like the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And her and her friends were like aesthetically very goth, like very vampiric, very like that was the time of Anne Rice and Interview with the Vampire and all
Oh
that
yeah.
stuff, and Tori Amos and
Yep. Oh
Nine
yeah.
Inch Nails, and like it was just like very ubiquitous back then. And I just was fascinated by them because they were like these like horror movie monsters.
Yeah.
They
No.
were like vampires to me, and so that was really cool. But then as I got a little older, when I got into my early teen years, so probably around 13, I think is when I started to find the music.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I was like, oh, this is like what my sister was listening
Yep.
to.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't really connect those wires until then, because I wasn't really super into music as a 10-year-old. I mean, I don't think most 10-year-olds
I
are.
think most of them are kind of starting like listening to not just their parents, but
Yeah.
you're kind of like branching out. Like for me, it was the radio. It was like, okay, what
Yeah.
what piques my interest and stuff like that. So yeah, I get it.
Right. Yeah. And I think like, so, I first got into music probably around middle school, and I was listening to a lot of like alternative, just rock. Like new metal was sort of becoming a big thing. So like Corn
Or
and that
Olympus,
kind of stuff. Yeah, all
orgy,
that
stuff like that. Yeah.
exactly. All that stuff was like kind of the thing, and that was sort of the doorway, because I had friends in middle school that were like, "Hey, do you know who Corn is?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, this is pretty cool."
Hmm.
But then as I started to learn more about music, and then I found like Joy Division was like the first really big one that like sort of blew the lid off of everything for me, was like getting into Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division, and then understanding that was part of this broader post-punk thing, but then that got more delineated down into like goth. And that just really fascinated me. And I grew up in a really rural, like middle of fucking nowhere Georgia town, like 30 minutes away from Athens.
Mhm.
So I mean, out in the absolute boonies, and there was this like really amazing preciousness to that music, because like nobody knew who these bands were. Like I'd talk to people, be like, "Have you ever heard of Joy Division or Bauhaus or whatever?" And people are like, "No, I've never heard of this." And I used to spend all of my money, like allowance, or then when I became a teenager and had a job, any bit of money. I worked at a movie theater, and I would just spend all of my money at the record store here in Athens. There's like Low Yo-Yo stuff and Wuxtree, or they're still here actually.
Oh, good.
And I would just blow all my money on the records. And yeah, I think it just sort of like, I just went down this rabbit hole on forum boards, because we didn't really have like Google. It wasn't just like, what is goth? What are goth bands? So you had to kind of go on forum boards and find information from human beings. But it was better in that way, because everything was kind of curated, and it
Yeah.
wasn't just like the AI construct says
Oh,
that goth is blah blah blah, and so I kind of miss those days too, because of that preciousness. There was this really satisfying thing about finding a new band, or an old band that's new to you, that is like really obscure and very bizarre. Like, I mean, I remember like when I learned about the band Cortex from Sweden,
oh.
and I was just like blown away. I was like 16,
Mhm.
and even now, like not a lot of people know about Cortex. But it's, yeah, I don't know. I wonder if kids are having the same experience finding music now. I think it's much easier, which is a good thing. But it's just, I don't know. There was something to that whole process of like going to the record store and like talking to the old curmudgeon guy who's like, "Oh, you like Joy Division. Well, have you ever heard of Comsat Angels or the Chameleons or whatever? And that I don't know. That maybe I'm romanticizing something because I'm just getting older.
Oh, like the funny thing, okay, so with that, I kind of followed in that same path where it was middle school. I looked up to the older, and again, it was everybody's walking around with metal lunch boxes because
Mhm.
Manson has a song called Lunchbox, and that became a thing. And then everybody's wearing, fishnets and striped stockings and that kind of thing. And I
Right.
loved it. I loved that aesthetic. I loved that style at the time. And then, followed into, because you're kind of going, what's kind of popular, but also what's alternative. So you're going to the
Mhm.
radio, you got Orgy, Limp Bizkit, Corn, Rammstein, I think was getting up there. So
Mhm.
you're kind of getting a lot of these, and still with Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson, they're still, on the sort of the pops, and then you're going, you go to the internet to divulge into it. You're going, I need to
Right.
learn more. And even then with the forums, it's you're learning more about all these other artists and stuff like that. So I can totally relate. Like I feel like we followed in that same path and stuff like
Yeah.
um but yeah, so when you were in high school, was that when you decided you wanted to join the army?
No, actually, when I was in high school, I was like vehemently against
That's how I
joining the military, which is hilarious because like, my dad was in the army and
yeah, yeah.
like the invasion of Iraq happened in when
I
I
was
was in
gonna
high
ask that, but
school
I
and I
wasn't
was
too
like,
sure.
what
Yeah,
is
with
going
9/11.
on? Yeah, I mean, 9/11 to me was like such a like it wasn't a real thing, because I was so young and I couldn't comprehend the gravity of how serious that was. And like, I just didn't have like the mental facilities to like understand the complexity of something so
A lot
horrible.
deeper than what most people
Yeah.
on the internet,
It
I
was
guess.
just
Yeah.
exactly. It was just like, oh, this awful thing happened. And we just sort of took it at face value. But I think yeah, for me, like watching the invasion of Iraq happen like live on television, I was like, I had these two metalhead friends, and we all just kind of watched it happen. And like at first, we were like typical teenage boys, like, oh shit, this is badass. But then it's like, oh wait, nah, this is fucking awful. Like watching Baghdad get bombed in
Yeah.
in real time. We were, and
It's
I felt like a sense of revulsion. But then I mean, as it progressed, and I got out of high school, I dropped out of high school when I was 17, and I was like working in a car parts factory, and I was still working at the movie theater, and I just wasn't like I was in a very like placeless time in my life where I like had no direction, I had no sense of moving forward or progress or anything like that, and it was really I was just in a very bizarre place in my life where I felt like I needed a very extreme, drastic change, and had I not changed then and at that time, that I was never going to. And so I started to kind of think about like how to do something that was really challenging. And yeah, I never wanted to like go fight or kill or anything like that, but I wanted to be like just absolutely challenged in the hardest way possible. And I felt like I did some, reading about Afghanistan and sort of the Taliban, and I've always been sort of against religious indoctrination. So that kind of had an aspect of it for me, was like, yeah, let's get rid of these like religious fundamentalists who are, ruling in a very extreme version of their religious doctrine, and sort of brutalizing especially women and femme presenting people. uh but it, I mean, I won't say that that was like the reason at all. I think, I mean, it was a very like naive, selfish kind of concept of just like, I need to do something very different, very extreme, and I need to challenge myself.
Right.
And that was the most apparent way. And I remember talking to my dad about it, and he was like very apprehensive about it, but very supportive, because he was like, he'd been in the military for a long time, and he's like, well, you're gonna get sent overseas if you join now. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it's so long ago, and I just, I don't know. I think when your brain, when you're like 19, 20 years old, it's not fully formed, and you're not thinking about the reality of things. You're thinking about like, oh, I can do a couple years in the military, and that'll help me like elevate my position in life. And like, what I was mostly interested in was like learning, like being disciplined, being like built up, and coming out of the other end of something so extreme that you're kind of able to handle anything. And I guess like to some effect that did happen, but it comes at a very incredible cost too. I mean, like, going to Afghanistan and the stress of all that was something that I will live with for the rest of my life. And that's not to say like woe is me, feel bad for me, because like I was part of something awful. Like,
Right.
there's no two ways about it. That war and that whole fucking conflict was perpetuated by a corporate machine, the military industrial complex, that perpetuated something that should have ended a decade before I went there.
Oh, I agree.
But it kept going because people were making money off of it.
Yeah,
And
money. Yeah.
and but that's like stuff that you don't, like, again, when you're 19, 20, or even later, you don't, until until you're educated and like can articulate like why it's wrong, or why, the history of why it's bad.
Mhm.
You just sort of like in the system, and I think that's almost by design. I mean, there's a reason why they pick 18, 19-year-old kids to go fight, because like 30-year-old dudes can fight just as well.
Yeah.
But 30-year-olds are a little more tempered, and
Yeah.
like have a little bit more cognitive, processing, and a little bit more experience and wisdom than an 18, 19-year-old who's just like ready and willing to go. So yeah, I don't know. I view that time of my life with a lot of reverence. I mean, I will always be pro soldier. I'm
Mhm.
pro anybody that's willing to like put their life on the line to do something that does inevitably defend like our ability to live our lives. I mean, like, anybody that says like, oh, we don't need a military is absolutely fucking naive
Bananas.
and
Yeah, you're bananas.
ridiculous. Like, because there are like even worse like strongman despots, like Vladimir Putin, for example. There are horrible people out there that will use even worse ideologies than what we espouse
Mhm.
to abuse and like eradicate people. So I'm always like appreciative of that concept, but I think this country has a love affair with the military, and sort of a religious fervent
Yeah.
to that devotion to it, and that has to end. Like, you can appreciate and respect something without worshiping it. And yeah, I just I think that it's like a tragedy that that so many people, that, well, two things, in a lesser sense, that so many young men and women were duped into buying into this like war on terror thing, but more importantly, the sheer number of lives that were destroyed because of that fucking awful thing. And that's the sad reality that I think a lot of like global war on terror veterans are realizing. It's like, yeah, it sucks that we like suffered, but more importantly, think about all these people whose homes and lives were destroyed. It's so fucking awful and tragic.
And I think like again, when you were, 18, 19 and stuff like that, you're so pumped full of this like energy and this like rage and testosterone. And you're like,
Yeah.
fight. And, versus, someone who's 30, they got baggage, I guess you can call it.
Right,
They
right.
got house, there's so much that they don't want to let go of that.
Right.
It's almost like disposable to have 18 to 19-year-olds, where it's like, well, they'll come and go, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So see, in the beginning when that happened, I saw it and I was just like, holy shit. And especially when they're coming to your school going, all right, let's take a survey. Who all wants to come? Like I remember that moment where, they come to the school and they would pull all the guys out of school, or I think most of them were boys, and they would put us in the library and go, okay, you're going to take this little test and then put your phone number down, and then they'll, okay, we'll call you. And, I'm in college at the time, and they're like, okay, what do you want to do with, your life? And I'm like, well, I want to do music, or I want to do movies. Well, did you know you can do that in the military? And it's like, can I really? But, they're just trying to kind of pull you in. And believe me, if there's one thing I respect soldiers so fucking much, and how much shit that they've gone through. And I've talked to so many people, and there's one where, you on the example, I feel like you've taken everything that you've learned and you've transformed it into something positive, where you've taken it and going, I'll take these elements and I'll kind of filter it into this music and to, music videos or whatever it may be, and go, let's take this as a positive experience versus, some people that I know have just, lost their minds on, booze and medication just because of PTSD and shit. It's like, it's fucking scary, but I respect every bit of everybody who's been through that shit.
So, I mean, and it's like, I think it's really funny when people get really high-minded about like, oh, you are in the military, like you're just part of the machine, you're part of the problem. It's like, look, man, again, these kids are given a very limited amount of time in their youth to make this decision that's presented in a very like shitty kind of shisty way that like like you said, they kind of they show you all the benefits, but they're never like
car salesman.
They're never like, oh, and by the way, you might just be walking around Afghanistan and step on a pressure plate and like lose your leg, and then you're that forever, like that's your life now. That they don't talk about that. They don't present that as even a possibility. And they definitely don't talk about like the whys and wherefores. It's literally when you're in the military and you're going overseas, the only thing that you ever really hear, and it's not like even that hammered into your head, it's just like you're protecting America, you're defending democracy and freedom. Okay, but it's really not like it doesn't, like nobody gives a shit about that over like in Afghanistan or like in a combat zone.
You're just part of the whole chess piece. You're chess.
You're not even thinking about the big picture at all. You're thinking about the people to the left and right of you, and that's it. And like that became more important to me than any notion of, nation or democracy or form of government or defending anything. It was really that, and I think every soldier who's been in a combat zone will tell you it's all about the love of your family unit, that platoon or that squad or whatever, that becomes your family in a very deep way that it transcends anything that I've ever been a part of, like any relationship, any job, any kind of connection to another person that I've ever had will never touch the level of knowing, like just absolutely 100% knowing that you will die for somebody like that, and knowing that they will do the same for you is wild. And yeah, it's that to me was always more important. And I think there's a beauty to that. There's a really pure simplicity and beauty to that emotion that most people just don't understand, because until you're in those circumstances, like I didn't get it until I was there, but it's a very real thing. And yeah, but then counteractively though, when you're away from that thing, that's horrible. Like that's why so many people end up with PTSD and end up not even just PTSD, but just like depression and turn to shit like booze and drugs after the military, because it's honestly, a lot of it's not because of the horrible things. It's because you've been through horrible things with people that you love, and then they are gone, and then they are all over the world, or they die or end their lives short or whatever. And and then you're just sort of in this vacuum, and you're like desperately trying to find meaning on any level that's even near that again. And it's just so, it just sucks, you know. I mean, it really, it like, and I mean, I've been through years of therapy, and I did find something that was almost equivalent, you know, which was the fire department, and then also this band, and like
Yeah, tell
this
me more
music.
about that. How it transitioned. You left the military. I was going to go into that question. I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt
yeah.
you.
No, you're good.
So walking away, joining the being helpful with the firefighter team, and then becoming Vision Video. And so, tell me about that
Yeah.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, I moved back to Athens. I left the active army in 2016, and I moved back here. And originally, my plan was to go to graduate school back at UGA because, like, I'm alumni. So I was like, well, it'll be easier for me to get in. I'll have in state tuition, all that jazz. And yeah, so I moved back to Athens, applied for grad school, but I got waitlisted because I was trying to go into like social work, and the social work school here is like tiny, and there's just like a backlog of people who had applied. So I'm waiting on word from that, and I was bartending full time, and like one of my favorite regulars came in on like a Monday night, and it was just like him and I, and it's just the two of us, and he's a firefighter at the department I ended up working for in Metro Atlanta. And basically, you know, I was sitting there with him, and I was like, "Hey, what is it? You're a firefighter. What's that like?" You know, and he's like, "Oh man, it's the best job in the world because all you do is help people. That's it. There's no questionable gray area to anything. You just show up on most of the time. It's like the worst day of somebody's life, and you do what you can to help them." And yeah, I mean, and he was absolutely right. But he was like, "Oh, you'd be great at this. Actually, you should apply because they'll hire you like that because you're a combat veteran, you've got time in service, blah blah blah." So I mean, I literally went home that night, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? He's right. Like, all you do is help people, and that's at that point in my life. That's all. I mean, and that's still kind of the sentiment, but that's all I really want to do is just help people. Especially because I participated in something that was so ugly, so it felt like a counterbalance. Um, so yeah, I applied that night, and like a week later, I went in for an interview, and they like called me on the way home from the interview. They're like, we'd like to give you a conditional job offer, assuming you can get through the sort of physical screening and stuff. And then yeah, like I think a month or so later, I was like in the fire academy. And yeah, I did that for 5 years. But that was like right right when I got into fire academy was when I was starting Vision Video. And so I was writing a lot of songs like while I was doing that, you know, and the fire academy was like a full-time thing. So it wasn't, I never really set out to make Vision Video like my job or whatever, or like do anything other than just write music and sort of process my experiences through music. Because I was also like, that time of my life, 2017 and 18, was when I started to really experience like PTSD symptoms and just really crazy mental health issues. And it really became clear to me during that time that music and Vision Video and all this stuff was like my outlet that was keeping me grounded. And I always felt better when I could like write a song or just like play guitar and just push this like negative energy into something constructive or creative. And yeah, I mean, you know, as the pandemic hit, and we were in the lockdowns, you know, I spent you know, so much of my free time I spend going to shows. You know, I'm like a Tuesday night punk rock show like with a glass of whiskey kind of guy. Like that's my church.
Yeah.
And that was gone. So I was like, well, what about if I just try to like get our music out there and start focusing on like promoting what we do? So I just started really getting active on social media and just spending all of my time. I mean, like, so as a firefighter, uh, you're on 24 hours on a job, and then you're 48 hours off. So I'd go work for 24 hours, and I'd come back home here, and I would just like, and at that time I was single. I didn't have anything else to do. And I was just like, screw it, I'm going to put all of my time and energy into this.
Yeah.
And I did, and it just grew and grew. And then, you know, like the goth dad thing happened, and that kind of exploded. And like, yeah, it's so bizarre to me, because I never in 1,000 years would have thought we'd be even on this level. And we're not like some prolifically huge band. We're like, you know, we just get by. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's this very like erroneous belief that like when you have a larger social media following, you're just like raking in the cash, which A is not the point, but B is also very false. Like,
Very
I
false.
make fucking nothing off of social media. Like, I really don't make any money off of this stuff.
Right.
But even with that being said, you know, I would never have imagined that I would be able to just at least get by on music. And it's so it's really satisfying, and it's incredibly edifying to know that like what you're doing resonates with people to an extent that they support you enough so that you can do this full time. So like, you know, right now, like I really love where I'm at in my life, because, you know, like financially it's like very up and down, and the stability is very come and go. And like, you know, usually by the end of the year, like, because we're normally from December to about February, there's nothing that really happens in the music industry. So we're just like, oh shit.
Kind of hanging on. Yep.
Yeah. And the only time I make any income is like when we're on the road, essentially. But yeah, so there's moments of just being like, oh shit, like I gotta pay my bills. Like,
right. Yeah. No.
But I'm just super satisfied to be able to like get up and you know, I have kind of a routine when I'm at home now. It's just like I get up, I exercise for about an hour, and then I like start playing music, or I start like making videos, or just doing whatever. And it's just a really cool life, because I don't like really answer to anybody other than myself now, which is really satisfying, because I've spent nothing but my entire adult life answering to like, you know, I've had some really great leaders in both the military and the fire department, and I've had some dog shit leaders who are like fucking absolutely people should not be in positions of power whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it's nice to know that like at the end of the day, everything that I do or fail to do is on me.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool thing. So I'm just really grateful that the universe and that people have provided the opportunity. I think a lot of musicians forget that when they get to a certain level where they are able to do it full time. I think a lot of people forget that like you're beholden to the people that support you, and that's it. Like those and to not appreciate that is a disservice to those people. To not be like, hey, like I can do this because of you, so thank you. So yeah, it's just been an amazing route. But then, you know, when I left the fire department 2 years ago, my biggest fear was, oh shit, am I leaving? Because like every day, almost every day, you do something that helps save somebody's life. Because I was a paramedic firefighter. I'd be one shift, I'd be on the ambulance, next shift on the fire engine, and just go back and forth. And when you're on the ambulance, like very regularly, you do things that like directly help save somebody's life, or you make a very big difference in somebody's life at the bare minimum. And I was really scared that leaving that job was going to feel like leaving the military again, which was like, am I going to find satisfaction in life and find, more importantly, meaning in life? And that kind of got dissuaged in a very immediate sense, because going out on tour all the time, and people come up to you and say like, hey, I just wanted to tell you that this song really helped me through this hard time. And you hear that a lot, and it's incredibly satisfying, because I still feel like I'm helping people just in a very different kind of way. It's not in a very literal way.
I've seen that online with a lot of comments. I don't mean to interrupt you, but
No,
seeing
you're good.
a lot of comments where people are like, "Oh, I was a soldier. I was there." You know, your song or just you telling your story has really helped me get through. So I can see. Yep.
Yeah, and it's, I think it's sort of its own form of service now, because I write in a way that is, I try to be as open about my experiences and like the things that I've gone through, especially with mental health stuff. And that's not easy. It's really hard to do that like every night and to be kind of threadbare about it and open about it. Uh, and that does take a toll. And you have to like, I've had to really learn to like kind of give myself space and time, like especially coming home from a tour. Like now I basically spend a week minimum doing absolutely nothing now. Whereas like in the past I'd get home and be like, all right, I got to go back to songwriting. I got to go back to content creation, all that. And now I'm just like, I mean, maybe it's just because I'm getting older too, but like I'm just like, I'm gonna sit here and do nothing for a minimum of a week. So
Tell me about, Vision Video kind of generating some steam, getting some music, going on tour, starting off local, moving to the States, and then you guys are fucking playing the UK and shit like that. Like, tell me about that.
yeah, it's really incredible to go overseas, especially, and like because it's totally different over there. Like our touring experience over in, say, for example, the UK is very different from what we experience here in the US. Like, first of all, it's very easy to tour the US because it's so cheap here. Like touring, fuel is like your biggest cost because you're driving all the time. And fuel is very inexpensive in America. It's very ridiculously cheap compared to the rest of the world. I know everybody's like, "Oh, gas so expensive." It's not. I promise you. Just go to the UK, go to Europe, and you'll be shocked. They're paying effectively $8 a gallon over there. But there's also like there are a million music venues in America. There in every small town, there's like one music venue at least. And yeah, so and our audience just really proliferated within the US especially. So going over to the UK is it's really fun for me, to be honest, because like it's such a different experience when you play to a crowd of 500 people or say like 1,000 people versus 50 people. Like we put on the exact same show, but I find it almost more enjoyable to play these like smaller shows, to be completely honest, because because you just like you're right there with the people, and you get to like hang out afterwards and talk to everybody. And like we're at that point in the US where I like can't talk to everybody, and I miss just being able to hang out and like give time to everybody possible, because I'll literally lose my voice. And then you go to the next show and it's a disservice to that next show because you don't have the voice to do it. So yeah, the UK is and Europe is like a lot of fun for me, especially right now, because it kind of reminds me of the beginning of when it started to kind of grow, pick up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, and I also just, I mean, like I think one of my problems with the US is that every there's so many really amazing places in the US. Like there's so many cool cities, there's so many cool towns, but by large we have kind of the same culture. And our country has really been co-opted by like ultra capitalism, like ultra franchised corporatism. And so like you go to these towns and 90% of the town is a strip mall, and it's like the Panda Express and TJ Maxx and Walmart and blah blah blah, and it's all in a row. And you're like, all right, this is the exact same as every other town that I've been to. But you go to Europe and the UK, and there's like language differences. Like even within the UK, if you're in Manchester and you go 3 hours north to Glasgow in Scotland, and it's totally different. And the architecture totally different, the history is totally different. But then you go to continental Europe and it's like Berlin, Germany to Paris, France. It's like 7 hours, but it is vastly different, vastly different. And I don't know. I just like being in a place that's a little uncomfortable and a little different and a little bizarre and like alien to me. Like I find it exciting to be in a very weird, out of your comfort zone kind of place.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, so when I was in the military, I got stationed in Germany because like I'm half German and I
Yeah.
speak a good bit of German, and
Yeah.
like I spent almost all of my free time. Like if we in the military, you get a lot of like 4-day weekends because you work so much.
Yeah.
And I would anytime I had a 4-day weekend, I was somewhere else. In I went to Eastern Europe a lot because I'd really enjoyed it there for some reason. It's just like it's super cheap. Everybody is incredibly friendly, like disarmingly friendly, and the history is always like fascinating because it's sort of like Soviet. I don't know, something about that
No,
appealed
I
to
get
me.
it. I get it.
But I got used to traveling a lot, and I miss that sensibility of like, oh, next month I'm going here, and then a couple weeks later I'm going here, and then here. In America, it's hard to do that because it's so
Yeah.
egregiously expensive. So it's kind of nice to be able to like go for work to the UK and then kick over to Europe or vice versa, and like be in a different place all the time. And my partner Scarlett, she's the same way. So it's like whenever we go over there, she usually comes with us, and it's just like it's so much fun. And I'm a bit of like a, I mean, 90% of my favorite bands are from England or the
Yep.
UK. So I mean, I think, and what we do there, like if you look at continental Europe, like Germany or Paris or France or wherever, versus the UK, what we're doing is way better received in the UK than it is in Europe, because I think Europeans are more attenuated to like a little bit more like industrial, like kind of techno-y EDM, like goth stuff, yes, but they like the more electronic elements of it, the dark wave stuff. Whereas I think Vision Video is inherently more of a like rock driven band and guitar driven, which is that's all my favorite music. It's like there's a little bit of synth, but there's a whole lot of guitar.
Yeah, I noticed that like when I talk with a lot of like, I mean, I keep to becoming like a lot of artists I've been drawn to this year have been, electronic, goth, industrial, kind of it varies. And there's a one thing that I'm learning a lot is that going to Germany, they love it because they feel a little bit more close, like people like kind of like the best way I can kind of describe it is that a lot of them are kind of like small town USA because
Yeah,
it's very it's not taken over by corporate greed. You know what I'm saying?
right, right.
You grew up 30 minutes outside of Athens, where I right now live in, I'm about 45 minutes out of St. Louis. So it's a
Yeah,
small town. You got Hicks
right.
hillbillies out here.
Oh
Believe me.
yeah,
And so I think with a lot of small towns, when they got, oh, we got a US band here. You know what I'm saying? Like in Germany, where it's like, we got a band from the United States. Let's go. Like it becomes
yeah,
I want to say like an event, but it's like, ooh, let's go check these people out. Like, you know what I'm
right.
saying? Like where I can see you're benefiting a lot more being in Germany and all those because they're like, ooh, there's a US band that is kind of like the sounds that we like here.
Right.
And so I can definitely see, and I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. The other issue I think with Europe, the continental Europe
Mhm.
versus the UK, and this is why I enjoy the UK touring wise, I think
Yeah.
a bit more than continental Europe, is that they don't have as much infrastructure for smaller bands. Like a band like us that pulls I'd say on average in continental Europe, we're bringing in 100 people a night, which is not like a huge thing, but they don't have a lot of smaller venues that are around the range of say 100 to 300 capacity, whereas the UK has a ton of venues that are in that range.
Good.
And I think a lot of that boils down to like in the UK they have pub culture. They're used to going out like
Club.
almost every night to have like a pint
Yeah.
or just sit around the table with friends, and then there's like a band playing or there's some sort of music event going on. They don't really have that as much in Europe, I feel like. I mean, it exists, but it's not like the nucleus of their society like it is kind of in the UK.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think in Europe it's just getting really expensive as well for them to facilitate a lot of that. So there's a lot of places that are closing. but that's happening everywhere in the world. That's happening here too. I mean, it's just like the cost of running a small music venue is egregiously expensive because the cost of rent of a place is going up, but also the cost of electricity and the booze and all the shit you got to do. It's like I don't know how anybody does it anymore, and that's upsetting because it used to be pretty reasonable and accessible.
Well, when you first started out thinking, okay, I'm going to go to a venue, of course they're going to pay me. Why wouldn't you
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
right.
so you're going in going, oh, I guess I have, there's people who are hungry for music, or there's people who want to go out and go to a venue, and
Right.
like, you get like just awakened. The first show
Right.
where you're just like, I did a small venue. I mean, it was well-known venue out here in St. Louis called the Creepy Crawl, where a lot of band like, all these bands would come, and I'm drawing a blank on all of them, Mudvayne and Limpet, like all these bands. And the
Yeah.
first night, I was like, oh, I was rudely awakened. Like, there's not a lot of people who just want to come to venues and want to experience local music. And there's some that are
Yeah.
like that, but you get woken up pretty quickly when you start doing music, where you're like, oh, I'm just gonna go ahead and do this for the art. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you
I
hold
mean,
on to that. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
it really is. It's incredibly precious, and I mean, we are losing it in a lot of ways because again, corporate greed. Like
Mhm.
there's these corporations that are buying up even small and intermediate venues, and then they're charging like egregious fees and all this stuff, and it's chokeholding the entire music industry because these small independent venues can't compete or they can't keep up with the cost, and I mean it's really it's a disservice to the entire spirit of the thing, I think. And but I mean, even on the consumer end, if you're going out to a show at one of these venues, like you're paying their fees, you're paying all their egregious costs, and then you're buying a beer that's like marked up 75 100% of its actual value, and then you're spending a ton of money, and then it's like you got to get out there to the city center or wherever the place is, and all that stuff stacks up, and I think people are just like staying home more. It's like it's so much cheaper just to like be entertained at home. But I'm a huge advocate for live music because I think there's a communion to it. There's like a ritualistic nature to it, not to get too woo out there,
No,
but
I get it.
I mean, it's like we human beings are wired to get together physically and to be together and to appreciate things because it draws us into community, and it reminds us like, oh, I'm not alone, and I have this thing that I love, but you love it too, and that's cool because it connects us, and we bond over that, and we I mean, that's the whole point of this thing.
That's a huge crux of like social media, where you're trying to connect
Mhm.
with people, but a lot of people,
Yeah.
there's a give and take where you're trying to, and
Yeah.
that's why I focused a lot of social media, especially starting out with the podcast, where I'm trying to connect with people and, hey,
Yeah.
it's supposed to, connect as a community, not just artists and, podcasts, which is fresh for me. So I'm just kind of going, let me get as many musicians as I can, and let's all just kind of work as this community of network,
Right.
whatever. And you get a lot of people where it's, they think, connecting with somebody, and yet they still feel so alone. I'm like, you need to get out there and you need
Yeah.
to, you know, face to face. I mean, anytime I have a concert experience, I'm riding out the waves the past couple of days where it's just like, man, I remember that one song and that one time. It's like
Yeah.
people need to get out. And I think we missed that a lot, where people were missing going out after COVID hit, the big drasticness, and people are going, I miss concerts, I miss this, I
Right.
miss that. And I'm like, then you need to hold on to that as long as you can and just ride that feeling where it's like, oh, I need to embrace going out and doing shows and
Yeah.
experiencing shows, or just whatever it may be that you love to do, is hold on to that, because it could come up and pull the rug underneath us at any moment.
Yeah. I
You know
mean,
what I mean?
we are. I think we experienced the the fragility of society and how easy it can all just be taken away.
Yeah.
And but that's all the more reason to support live music. And
Mhm.
and yeah, I feel like a lot of people didn't quite learn that lesson, you know, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of people were so traumatized by that, you know,
Mhm.
year and a half period of time,
Yeah.
where they just sort of put that feeling aside. And I don't think it has really resonated with them, like, hey, you've got to support this stuff
Yeah.
because it will go away. And we're losing the narrative. I mean, again,
Mhm.
because these corporations that are purchasing up all these venue spaces and commodifying music, you know, like I think about, like, my goal with Vision Video is like, if even if we became like a huge band, I just don't want to charge people a ton of money to come see us, because it's just crazy. It's just so, it's so like
Ticketmaster. It's
grubby and nasty to just be like, yeah, give me like, you know, $75 to come see it.
oh
Like, that's crazy. That's like, you
insane.
know, yeah. But that's like one of the reasons why I really respect the shit out of like Robert Smith, you know, and The Cure. Was
Oh yeah,
his battle with Ticketmaster was amazing. I'm
it's
like, these
amazing.
guys are real.
Huge.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, they know that they have more money than they are ever going to need,
Yep.
and they're trying to keep it reasonable for people because they want to do the thing, but they also want people to enjoy it. And yeah, I thought that was really cool of him to
I,
be like, personally be like, Ticketmaster, stop your shit.
and what was great, God, that new fucking album, God,
Yeah,
man,
it's awesome. It's
it's
really good.
insane. And just that whole stream of concerts, and man, at his age, he's fucking touring and he's
Yeah.
every night. And then to drop the album, and then he does the live thing
Yeah.
on the live stream on YouTube. I was like, I was just riding out the Cure wave the entire. My brother got to see him in Chicago. I was so jealous, but I was like,
Yeah.
good for you. Go see them when you can, you know. And man, they just been killing it. They've been killing it
Yeah.
so hard. I love it, dude. I
Yeah, they're
love it.
phenomenal. I
They
got to see
deserve
them
it,
last year, and it just blew me away how good.
dude. Tell
Like,
me
I'd
about
seen them once before, but that
it. Yeah,
last year was truly incredible. And I mean, yeah, he's like, I don't even know how old he is. He's like in his mid 60s, I think,
yeah.
and he's like, still sounds incredible. I mean, he really did. It's still a phenomenal show, and they play for like 3 hours,
3 hours.
which is insane. I can't imagine playing a 3 hour show. That's wild.
Yeah, I
So
uh I saw I didn't they did a theater live stream. I think it was it the 45? Was it called Curation?
yeah.
I'm trying to remember. It was at was it Hyde Park? Am I thinking that run right?
Oh, right. Yeah, I think so.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, me and my brother went to the theater, saw that, and I was just like blown away. And what got me was so the Cure was kind of it was the Crow soundtrack that got me into the Cure. Burn,
Right.
the song Burn. I
Oh
went
yeah.
crazy, went to some garage sales, found some tapes for the Cure. It was Killing the Arab and Wish. Those were the
Yeah.
two ones that I bought. And he played at the edge of the deep green sea, and it just I felt my soul leave my body because that's my song, dude. That is the
Yeah.
saddest song. I mean, I you can say whatever the Cure said, all their songs are, but that one I just linked to me. And when he played
Yeah.
live, I mean, I didn't get to see him, but in the theaters, I was just like it just I don't
Yeah.
it was euphoric. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. It's a great song. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
he's the Cure has a very good way of tapping into like just raw emotion through
yeah.
sound. You know, it's like none of it is that like complex, or even,
It's
yeah,
not.
I mean, like, even lyrically, I think it can be pretty simple at times,
Yeah.
but he's got a way of getting to the core of the emotion of things. And I think that's like incredible, masterful skill that
Uh,
I wish I could have even a modicum of that.
You're doing it. You're doing it. Believe me, you know, don't, you know, humble yourself, but I think you're doing a pretty amazing job.
Thanks.
What's how's 2025 looking for Vision Video? What do you guys got going on?
uh so we're going to be doing some touring into the West Coast in the spring. We have like our next show's in Atlanta on January 31st. That's just sort of like a more local show.
Yeah, start local.
But Atlanta's great. We don't get to play there super often, so that'll be a lot of fun. Um, and probably going back to the UK in the summer and then Europe in the winter. Um, and then like also the fall, it looks like we're probably going to be doing a run with Panic Priest and sort of a co-headline with the March Violets, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, so I'm already working on new music. You know, I am sort of the only original member of the band now. And I mean, I'm kind of enjoying writing every aspect of it because it's sort of, you know, when you're with other writing members, you have to kind of bounce things off of each other, and I'm sort of going in a direction that I've always really wanted it to go, but you know, you have to kind of balance things, and yeah, it's just I'm not working on like a body of work that is an album, but more focusing on just like individual tracks and singles now. So a lot of it is just really, really raw, like very early Bauhaus. Like it's very punky goth stuff. It's really kind of back to the basics.
Yeah.
And losing a bit of the pop veneer, the goth pop thing, you know,
Of
like
course,
that's
yeah.
kind of, you know, shedding its skin a little bit and going back to something that I think is the core of like what I love about this genre and what I love about the music. But it's, you know, it's a little more, it's a little less slick, it's a little more jagged around the edges, and it's just like angrier. I don't know, it's a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more uh just, I don't know, like maybe brutal and raw. That's the best way I can put it so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still kind of, a lot of it's still taking shape, and you know, I don't really, I try not to like create music with intention. Like I don't sit down and go, I'm going to write a song about this.
Right.
I just sort of play guitar and mess around with synths and drum machines until something starts to take shape.
Yeah.
And I think that's always better because it's like your subconscious is like telling you where to send things, and there's more honesty to the subconscious mind than I think we give it credit. So yeah, but yeah, just I think throughout the year you're just going to see like every couple months it's just going to be a single, you know, and
how it started,
and
yeah.
I'm interested in doing it that way instead of focusing, because like when you're working on a record, like with modern horror, there was like this body of work, you know, songs that I had written that I was like, okay, this is all kind of coalescing together, and I have an idea for this album, and kind of exploring different aspects of like the failures of society and what we're all going through right now. And I wanted that concept to be the record, but with this, I don't really have any abiding sense of like a coherent body of work. I just want it to be good songs. You know, I just want to write cool songs that I enjoy to play live, especially, and hopefully that'll resonate with people. And but I'm also like, I'm taking some time away kind of from Vision Video in a way. I'm actually writing a book this year.
Cool.
I'm writing a horror novel, funny enough.
Hey.
And it sort of speaks to a lot of my experiences in life. But it's sort of about this guy in the near future. The first part of the story takes place in Bosnia, and there's kind of like conflict is erupting again in the Balkans, and there's like kind of ethnic cleansing hints happening again. So the UN and NATO sends military peacekeepers back to the region, and this American guy is there with his platoon in this like very small town that's out in the middle of nowhere. And essentially this sort of shape-shifting creature, this like paranormal but very real shape-shifting creature follows him back from the conflict. But he's a veteran of multiple conflicts, so he's got PTSD, and he doesn't quite know what's real and what's not
Get it?
real.
Yeah.
So people are experiencing things around him, and he and the people in his life are all kind of contending with the fact that like something is very wrong,
Yeah.
but it's not his fault entirely. It's this thing that's
Can't
very
trust his own brain. Yeah, I get it.
yeah, but
Yeah.
so he's having to kind of figure out what the hell is going on, and it sort of ends in this ultimate sort of battle against this creature.
I can't wait for it.
Yeah, so I'm really excited, but I'm
I
doing a
hope
lot of
I
research right
can
now on
push that thing
Bosnia.
through. I can't wait.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be cool, and I have like a really great outline for the story and certain characters and some really interesting twists that sort of play with like people's notions of like what a veteran looks like or is, especially like kind of an infantry veteran of a war, and again some of that speaks to my experiences in life.
Of course.
But yeah, so I'm spending a lot of time just right now. I'm researching Bosnia. I'm just reading like 4 different books about the history of Bosnia and the Balkans, but also some very like firsthand accounting of like what it was like to be there during the 90s and 90, especially 92, 93, when the worst of the fighting was really happening. Um, and but I'm really trying to do that in a way that is without like sort of a deadline, because I want it to be the best thing it can be. And I'm hoping that I can just sit down and like bam, it all just comes out. But I want to give myself the temporal space to like actually make it good and not like stress about getting it out. But within that, yeah, I'm sort of taking Vision Video and putting it like not to the peripheral, but just like I'm giving space for both things to happen simultaneously. But that does mean that we won't be touring as much as we have for the past like 2 years, especially like, we spent 6 months in 2020 or 7 months in 2023 and 6 months in 2024 effectively on the road. So I definitely want to take some time home and just like, yeah. And it's also nice just because like I love being at home. I love being on tour. It's so much fun. I look forward to it every time. But I am like kind of a homebody, especially recently. It's been so nice. Like I've gotten back into playing Warhammer. So I'm painting miniatures and like being a giant nerd.
Oh, big nerd. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. I love it. Good for you. Good for you. Oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait for the book, man. Just live your life, dude. That's amazing. I'm so glad you're got this. I get it. I mean, I don't tour, but I work at a job where I work a factory job. So believe me, it's like right now we're on our downtime, and I've been stupid lazy. Like after Christmas, it was like I'm doing nothing.
Yeah,
I'm enjoying every bit of it. So
that's awesome, man. Yeah, I think our society, especially in America, we allow this sense of like productivity to be the gauge of our value in
American
society.
Way.
Yeah, and I think that's bullshit. I mean, I definitely want to create and to be productive in some form of way, but I also don't want it to be at the cost of my sanity or the sanity of people around me. And I don't want it to be the gauge of my value to the world is like how much work have you done,
right?
Like that's I don't know, I guess like I'm learning to have more balance, and that was one thing that I didn't have like because of the military. It's like always work harder, strive every day, like fuck that shit, man. Like take a break, like take a knee, drink some water, fucking relax. Like it's so important because you can't do anything effectively or meaningfully if you're just stressed out and burn out. Like there was a time like about a year ago where I was like, and I kind of experienced this intermittently, but especially last year, where I was like, I think I'm done with this whole thing. Like just because I was so burnt out from like making content all the time and like doing the accounting for the band and like taking pictures and like getting on lives on social media and then going on tour and then writing songs and all and it was just like, this sucks. Like I'm not having fun anymore.
No,
there's no reason to do this if it's not fun. so yeah, I mean, balance is essential, but I think that applies to everybody, like regardless of what you're doing in life. Like just having a sense of balance is really, really, really important, and we as a society need to recognize that. 4-day work weeks, man, that's what
Yes,
everybody
I
needs.
encourage it. I encourage it. Don't let it be 5 or 6 or even 7. It's like, come on, it's just overkill after that
Yeah,
point. I get
yeah,
it. Um,
exactly.
I always end the podcast with um any words of advice, anybody who's watching this, anyone who's an artist, creator, whatever it may be, what words of advice do you have for anybody who looks up to your work and everything like that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is like don't worry about making your art your job. I think a lot of artists, again, kind of tying into what we were just talking about, a lot of artists, and I was the same way, and I still have vestiges of this, but a lot of artists believe that you're only successful if you're like only if you're doing this full time. And I mean, it is a measure of success, I guess, but one thing to keep in mind is that it very much so changes when you are reliant on it for your income, because you have a level of stress behind it that doesn't exist when you are working your side job or your full-time job, and this is like something you do just for the enjoyment of it. So I guess within that, I would say like always have fun and always enjoy the thing that you're creating, because again, if you're not enjoying it, it's probably not worth doing. um it has to be something that you still find sort of a magical allure to. So I would say don't make it your goal to be like a full-time artist. Make it your goal to find fulfillment in the things that you create, and then maybe one day that will happen. And I feel like that's the only way to make it happen anyway, is to find fulfillment in such a way that you share it with people, and people connect to it. Because you're not gonna like work hard enough to make it happen. Like working hard is an aspect of making that lifestyle possible, but it's not the way to it. The way to it is to connect with people and to share something that you've created out of passion and out of honesty and earnesty. Like that's like that's the only way forward, is to be real about it and just have a good time.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then yeah, just continue to push yourself. I mean, in the regard of, I think a lot of artists don't want to show things that they're doing because they're afraid of perception or judgment. And you've got to like crush that part of your brain and say fuck that, I'm putting it out there. uh you know you could sit on a song and try to perfect it
Mhm.
for months or years even, but it's not out there. Like it's
Yeah,
never going to breathe life. So I would rather get a song out that's not perfect, but
right.
it's out and it's something that people are engaging with. And
Great.
I don't know, I think that's I see that a lot in a
Yeah.
lot of artists who are like, well, I've been working on this for like a year, and I'm like, dude, just get it out there.
You Axl Rose, just get it out. Like,
Exactly.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Dusty, dude. This has been an incredible interview, man. I really appreciate you taking the
Thank
time
you.
out to talk with me,
No,
especially at
no
the end of the
worries.
year. I mean, 2024, and we're going into 2025, man. I'm really excited, man. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, no worries, man. Thank you for having me. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Thanks, man.